Hello, and welcome to your first Apple Watch tutorial. Before we start developing for the Apple Watch, we need to set up the Xcode environment. In order to do that, go to your App Store and search for Xcode. If we want to develop for the Apple Watch, we need Xcode 6.3 or higher. You can download Xcode 6.4 from the App Store right now, or you could go to developers.apple.com and download Xcode 7, which is in the beta version right now. If you don't already have Xcode installed on your Mac, it will show an install button over here. I already have it installed, so it shows the open button. You just click on the open button and it opens Xcode for you. In this video, we're going to learn how to create a new Apple Watch project. So first, click on Create New Xcode Project. Now, for this project, we're going to select Single View Application. Choose a name for your application. I'll choose Cookie Counter _ Apple Watch. Hit Next. Now select the location for your project and hit Create. Now this looks like a normal iOS application. In order to include the Apple Watch API, we will go to File, New, and then Target. Under the iOS section, you'll see Apple Watch. Select WatchKit app, click Next, and then Finish. Now Xcode is asking us if we want to include the WatchKit app scheme or not. We will click Activate. Now you will notice that there are two new folders over here, the WatchKit extension folder and the WatchKit app folder. The WatchKit extension folder includes all the files that are needed for the Apple Watch to run. The WatchKit app folder includes the interface storyboard. Now, to make sure everything is working fine, we are going to put a label inside the storyboard. So, select label and put it inside the storyboard. Select the assistant editor view. You will notice that the interface controller.m file has opened in the right hand window. Go to the interface controller.h file, hold Ctrl and drag the label into the .h file. We will call it title label. Now go into the interface controller.m file and we will set the text for this title label to Hello World. Now build the project. Onto a simulator now. You will notice that instead of one simulator, now we are running two simulators. One is your iOS app screen and the other one is your Apple Watch screen. Our label displays Hello World just like we wanted it to, so we know everything is working fine. Good job! In this project, we're going to learn how to use labels and buttons. So first of all, let's put a label inside our storyboard. Just drag it and drop it. And now we're going to put a button inside the storyboard. There you go. Now we're going to the assistant editor view where we are going to create instances for these labels and buttons in our .h file. Title label. Now we need to change the connection type from outlet to action. I'm going to call this click button. Now if you go into your .m file, you will see that a new method has been created. This method is called whenever a user clicks on the button. Now before we go into writing any code, Let's first give this button an image. For that, we will first include an image into a project file. So go to File, Add File, and then select the image from your computer. Now you see the image file has been included into a project file. Now I'm going to put it inside the WatchKit app folder. Now go back to your storyboard, select the button, and go to the Attributes Inspector. Now in the background option, change the image to the one you just included. I'm going to resize this button and change the label over here. Now I'm going to change the position a bit. So center and bottom. Resize it again. And now I'm going to change the position for the label. So center. That looks good. Now let's write some code. First, I'm going to make a global variable inside our .m file. So int counter is equal to 0. Then, inside our click button method, I'm going to increment the counter every time the user presses the button. Now, I'm going to set the text for this label. So, title label set text and a string with format specifier for integer and then counter. Also, we will change the initial value of this label to 0. Now let's run the code. So it looks like a WatchKit app works fine. That's good. Now, let's set a maximum value for the counter. So, if counter is equal to 10, counter is equal to 0. This will change the value of counter to 0 once it reaches a value of 10. Now let's check it out. So you see, the values keep looping from 1 to 10, just like we wanted them to. In this video, we're going to learn how to use tables for the Apple Watch. So let's create a new project. Single view application. We will call it vegetable lister. Hit next. Create. Now let's include the Apple Watch target into this project. So go to File, New, Target, and then WatchKit app. Hit finish. Now let's go to our interface.storyboard. So in the objects, we will select a table and put it inside a storyboard. Now let's go into the assistant editor view. We will create an instance for the table in our interface controller.h file. So hold Control and drag the table into the controller.h file. We will call it table. Now before we begin writing any code, let's make a file for the table row controller. So click on your WatchKit extension folder and hit Command N. Under the IO section, in the source option, click on Cocoa class and hit next. We will call it table row controller. Make sure it is a subclass of NS object and click next. Now going back to our storyboard, we will select the table row controller inside the document outline view. Now under the identity inspector, we will set the class of the table row controller to the file we just created. So table row controller. Now in the attributes inspector, we will set the identity for this table row controller to be table row controller. An identifier is a name for the table row controller so that other places in the code can access it. Now let's put an image inside a table row. Image. Let's also put a label inside our storyboard. Now we will make instances of these objects inside our table row controller.h file. So click on image, hold control and just drag it into the .h file. We will call it vegetable image. Same for the label, vegetable label. Now you see Xcode is giving us an error. It says unknown type WK interface image. This is because we haven't imported the watchkit.h file into this file. So let's do that. Import watchkit/watchkit.h, and you see the errors are gone. Now let's go back into our interface controller.h file. Over here, we will create two new properties of NS array. So property strong non-atomic NS array, and let's call it icons. For the second property, we will call it vegetable. Now we have created a property for the icons, but we don't have any icons yet. So let's include them. Go to File, click on Add Files, and let's add some icons. You can find these icons on icons8.com. I'll make sure to include the link in the description. Now let's go into our interface controller.m file. Now we will assign values to the two properties we just created. NS array with objects. And over here, we will include the names of the icons that we want to put in this array. So broccoli, png. Now similarly, for the vegetables array, we will put in the name of the vegetables that we just included. So now we will go into our will activate method and set the properties for the table. So self.table set number of rows. Now for the number of rows, we will use the count of the objects in these arrays. So self.vegetables count. And for the row type, we will include the identifier for the table row controller. So table row controller, just like we put it in the attributes inspector. So over here. Now we will populate the table with the values from these arrays. Now before you do that, make sure that you have imported the table row controller.h file into the interface controller.m file. Once you've done that, we will use a loop to populate the table. So for int I equals 0, I less than self dot vegetables count I plus plus. Now we will make an object for the table row controller. So table row controller, and let's call it row controller. Now we will assign this object the value of the current row controller object. So self.table row controller at index I. Now we will assign the objects of this row controller values from these two arrays. So for that, we will make two NS strings. So NS string icons self.icon object at index I. Similarly, for vegetable, we will call self.vegetables object at index I. Now we will set the object in the row controller according to these two NS strings. So row controller dot vegetable image set image, and we will use the property called set image name and set it to icons. Now for the row controller dot vegetable label, we will set the text to the value inside the vegetable NS string. Now let's hit run. Now you see the table has been populated just like we wanted it to, but the icons seem a little bigger. So let's change that. Let's resize the icons. So go into your interface storyboard and select the image. Now we will change the size of the image to fixed, and let's set it 40 by 40, and let's run it again. Now you see the icons are of the correct size, and it displays the labels from the arrays just like you wanted it to. Now you can add as many values to this table as you want, like I've done here, just by adding the values to the icons and vegetables properties. In this video, we're going to learn how to use sliders and switches for our Apple Watch projects. So let's create a new project. It'll be a single view application, and let's call it slider switch application. Hit next. Create. So let's include the Apple Watch target into a project. Now we will go to our interface storyboard. Now in the interface storyboard, let's put in a slider and a switch. Let's also put a label. Now we will open the Assistant Editor view. Now we will create instances of the slider, switch, and the label inside our interface controller.h file. So just hold control and drag and drop these in the interface controller.h file. We will call it label. For the slider, let's just call it slider. And we will change the connection type to action. For the switch, let's just call it switch. Again, change the connection type to action. Hit connect. Now go into your interface controller.m file. Now you will notice that two new methods have been created over here. The first one for the slider and the second one for the switch. Now we will put some nslog statements in these methods to better understand how these methods work and how we can use them for our Apple Watch projects. So let's begin. nslog modulus f value. Now this line will print the value returned by the slider whenever we change the state of the slider in our simulator. Similarly, for the switch, we will put type identifier for an integer because bool values switch between 0 and 1 in integer form. And let's run the code. Now, as I change the state of the slider, you will see the nslog statements appearing over here. 3, 2, 1, and 0. Similarly for the switch, it's off, so 0. It's on, hence the 1. So now we know how the slider and the switch works. So let's write some code for it and see what we can do with it. Now first, we will create a boolean variable to hold the value returned by the switch. So bool, let's call it mute, and we will set the initial value of this variable as true. Similarly, for the slider, we will create a variable int slider value and set it to 0. Now we will go in the slider method and set the value of the label to the value in the slider value variable we just created. So self.label set text and a string with format volume type identifier for an integer and slider value. But before that, we'll set the value returned by the slider and store it in the slider value variable. And we'll typecast it as int, since the value returned by the slider is in float. Now we will check inside the switch method if the switch is on or off. So if mute, then label will display the value of the slider value. So string with format type identifier and then slider value. Else self.label set text will display mute. Now we'll run the code. So you see the value in the volume label changes as we change the value in the slider. Now if we turn off the switch, there seems to be some problem. Oh yeah, we haven't changed the value for the mute variable. Let's do that. Mute is equal to value. Run it again. So now if we click on the switch, it displays mute. Now to make the slider output more values, we can go back to our storyboard, select slider, go to the attributes inspector and change the maximum value to 100. Similarly for steps, change it to 100 and select continuous. Now if we run the code, you see we can select values between 0 and 100, and if we click on the switch, it goes mute, and if we turn it back on, it gives us the original value of the slider. You can use these concepts to make an app which controls music on your iPhone through network calls called WC sessions, which will be discussed later in this course. In this video, we're going to learn how to use WC sessions to communicate between the iPhone app and the Apple Watch app. So let's create a new project. It will be a single view application and let's call it Communicator. Hit next and hit create. Now we will include the Apple Watch target into our project. So go to File, New and click on Target, and over here select the WatchKit app. Let's call it Apple Watch. Now before we begin making our app, let's include some image files into the project. So go to File, click on Add Files, and I will add some image files that I've already downloaded from icons8.com. I'll make sure to include the link in the description. Now go into your interface storyboard for the Apple Watch. Over here, we will put in some buttons. So we will put in 4 buttons inside a storyboard. Now go to your assistant editor view and we will make instances for these buttons. So we'll go into our interface controller.h file and click on the button, hold Ctrl and drag it and drop it into the interface controller.h file. Make sure to change the connection type from outlet to action and let's call it dog button. Similarly for the other buttons. Now we will change the label of these buttons according to the image files. So now let's go into our interface controller.m file. Now first of all, we will include the watch connectivity header file into our interface controller.m file. So now in our awake with context method, we will check whether a WC session is supported or not. In order to do that, we will do WC session is supported. If it is supported, we will make a variable for WC session and set it to the default session. Now we will change the delegate of this session to self and we will activate the session. Now what these lines of code do is they check whether your iOS or your Apple Watch device supports the WC session or not. Now you will notice we are getting an error over here. In order to fix this, we will just add the WC session delegate to this file. So WC session delegate, and you see the error is gone. Now we will create 2 global NS arrays to hold the value for the button and the other one to hold the value for the key. So let's do that. NS array value and NS array key. Now in our awake with context method, we will set the value for the key as NS array alloc with objects and we will call it animal name. This key will be used in the NS dictionary that we will create to pass over data from the Apple Watch app into the iPhone app. Now let's go into a dog button method and set the value for the value variable as dog. So we'll do alloc init with objects and we'll call it dog. Now we will make an ns dictionary called dictionary, and we will initialize it with the object array called value and the key array called key. Now we will use a wc session method called sendMessage method to send over data from the Apple Watch app to the iPhone app. You will notice that there are two methods over here which look similar, sendMessage and sendMessageData. Both these methods are used to send data across the iPhone and the Apple Watch, but they only differ in the type of data they send. SendMessage method sends over an NS dictionary, while the sendMessageData method sends over NS data. So we will use the sendMessage method for this project. So hit sendMessage and the message dictionary will be dictionary. Now since we aren't going to receive any reply from the iPhone app, let's just set the reply handler to nil. Similarly, for the error handler, let's just set it to nil. Now we will do the same thing for the other three methods. Now we could copy the same code for the other three methods, or we could make a new method and reuse the same code. So let's do that. We'll make some space over here and create a new method. We will call it hit button method, and it will accept a parameter of NS string type, and the parameter will be called animal. Now we will write the implementation for this method, which will be just these 3 lines of code. So cut and copy it over here. Now we will change this to the parameter we receive from the 4 methods, from the 4 button methods. So animal, and over here we will write self hit button dog. Similarly for the other 3 methods. Alright, so the Apple Watch part is done. Now let's head over to our storyboard for the iPhone app. Now let's head over to our storyboard for the iPhone app. Now inside our storyboard, we will include an image view. So over here, and now we are going to go into our assistant editor view to create an instance for this image view in a viewcontroller.h file. So drag it and drop it, and let's call it animal image view. Now let's go into our viewcontroller.m file. Now we will import the watch connectivity header file, just like we did it in our interface controller.h file. So watch connectivity. Now we will go into our viewDidLoad method. We'll write the same code in our viewDidLoad method to check if the wc session method is supported or not. And if it is supported, we will activate the session just like we did in our interface controller.m file on the Apple Watch. You do this in all the classes you want to share data between. So session delegate, so session activate session. and over here we'll set it to WC session delegate. Now we will use a method of WC session called did receive message over here and use the data that is received to set the image view to the desired image. So over here we will write ns string animal string value, and we will take the object for the key animal name. This key has to be exactly the same as we set it in our interface controller.m file. So if we go into our interface controller.m file over here, we notice that the keys are the same. Now we will compare the value in the animal string variable in 4 if statements against the values that we set over here in our interface controller.m file. So is equal to string dog, and let's make an ns string for the image name. So image name, if it's dog, we will set it to the image name of the dog file over here, the dog image file. So dog 100, else if the animal string variable has a fish, image name will be clownfish 100. Similarly for the other two values as well. And now we will set the image in our animal image view according to the image name inside the image name variable. So we'll do UI image named image name, and let's hit run. So now you will notice that the app has only opened inside our Apple Watch simulator and not in the iOS simulator. In order to open it in the iOS simulator, we'll go over here, select the communicator and hold control and hit run. This will open the app inside our iOS simulator as well. Now if you click on the dog button, the dog image shows up. Similarly, if you click on the fish button, the fish image shows up. Similarly for the other two buttons. Thus you see, you can use the WC sessions to pass data between the Apple Watch and the iPhone app.